Welcome. I'm happy to have all of you log on to this first of a series of webinars that the International CCU Assessment Harmonization Team will host starting from today. Throughout the month of May, we will share with you various activities, outcomes, and solicit your feedback. My name is Lca Reporting. I'm the director of the Global CO2 Initiative. And about 4 years ago, we took action to help put together a set of guidelines that will assist decision makers on what CCU, carbon capture and utilization technologies actually make environmental and economic sense. At the time, there was not a common framework to guide such assessments, and we felt the need to change that. About 2 years ago, we had a workshop, back then still in person, and that, in my opinion, was sort of a breakthrough moment for the whole CCUS community, in that it brought together the community of participants that you see on the right-hand side of these slides. An international team of university researchers, national lab researchers, and funded by various entities, including the Global CO2 Initiative and EIT Climate Kick. We have developed this International CCU Assessment Harmonization Group. I'm delighted, again, to emphasize that you're joining us today and hopefully for the remainder of our webinar series. And I'll hand it over to Tim Scone to also give you a warm welcome to this first of a number of events.
Thank you, Volker. On behalf of the Department of Energy and the National Energy Technology Lab and all of the national labs within our family, we have had nothing but a great experience working together with the Global CO2 Initiative. As Volker outlined, there are a lot of key drivers in the need for better harmonization and consistency in understanding carbon utilization technologies and their role in improving the environment. The work of this team to help harmonize on an international level, to bring together both from the techno-economic analysis as well as the life cycle analysis perspective to help drive that consistency, is going to help in the commercialization as well as the adoption of these technologies going forward. Not only is it about the analysis itself and the details behind the scenes, but also the educational aspects and making the knowledge more available to others to utilize. And today we're going to have a great presentation as starting this series of webinars around those aspects about knowledge dissemination and access. And I look forward to today's presentation and everyone's participation in the future webinars over the next several weeks as we walk through each of these technical areas. Volker and everyone, thank you very much, and back to you.
Thank you. And speaking of this series of webinars, just here for a quick glimpse, there's a whole list that I think all of you have seen showing the topics that we will cover. And again, we hope to see all of you in these future events too. But as Tim says, today we are actually focusing on two very specific outcomes. We have two parts of this 2-hour webinar. We'll first start with Grant Faber providing us an overview of one of the outcomes of this harmonization group, and that is a new website that puts together resources, links to resources for life cycle assessment and techno-economic assessment. And then in the second part, led by Lorenzo Cremonese, we will hear about work on a harmonized glossary. We found it incredibly important to work on that and put it up for comment and debate with you, because we have seen all too often that people mean the same thing and use two different words, or worse, use the same word and mean two different things. So harmonization for the terms that are being used is really important, and we dedicate an hour towards that. That said, it's now my pleasure to introduce Grant Faber, who will walk us through the AssessCCUS website. Grant.
Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm going to share here. So I'm going to share my whole screen and walk through some different things here. So I have some slides to start off with, and then we will go through the website. So yeah, so thank you, Volker, for the introduction. So my name is Grant Faber. I'm a techno-economic assessment researcher with the Global CO2 Initiative, and I've been working and leading the task team behind the AssessCCUS website for the past several months here. Yeah, I've been putting a lot of work into it. I'm very excited to talk about it today. You can access it using this link, assessccus.glossarytutorship.org. But I'm also going to go to this link a little later on and explore here. So just a little background in terms of what I'm going to talk about. So first, I'm going to go through the team. So who was working on this, who's given feedback, and so forth. I'm going to give a little bit of background on the site to give everyone a little bit of context. I will walk through the process and actual timeline in terms of what we did to actually develop the website. I'm going to just give a screenshot, again, just to give some context in terms of the site's actual structure. I'm going to talk about some potential expansions of the website going into the future. And then, as I mentioned, I'm going to walk through the actual website, as well as some templates we created for LCA and TEA for the website that we've been getting a lot of use out of. And then at the end, we're going to have a questions and feedback period as well. So if you notice anything throughout that you want to ask about, or especially if you notice anything that you think that could go onto the site, you know, extra resources, new ideas, a different structure, anything like that, please jot it down and we can discuss it as part of that last slide here. So first, I want to thank the team, to thank everyone on our task team within the International CCU Assessment Harmonization Group, who contributed to the site, who helped work on it, who helped come up with the name, the site structure, figure out what kinds of resources should be on the site. I had a lot of fun working with everyone here. And I have some other names at the bottom here of others who contributed very valuable feedback as well. And I want to point out Deborah for helping us actually design the website and kind of get it hosted and posted and so forth. A little bit of background to give some context. So Lca Initiative and the U.S. Department of Energy are kind of working together and coming up with this idea of, okay, we want this website, we want kind of this common source that offers resources for life cycle and techno-economic assessment, specifically for CCUS, carbon capture, utilization, and storage. But in reality, these resources can probably be applied to any kind of TEA or LCA. A lot of the things listed throughout the site, whether it's an individual database or just thinking about something like a functional unit, an LCA, or whatever it might be, honestly, that stuff can be applied more broadly. But like the site has a particular focus on CCUS, and you'll see that kind of throughout. For example, there's a whole page on CCUS that gives a background to it, and there are specific examples throughout the site that relate to CCUS technologies in particular. And the site was heavily influenced by the Global CO2 Initiative's guideline. I believe Volker had mentioned before our LCA and TEA guidelines, of which version 1.1 is now public. I was kind of going through those and pulling information from those to really shape the website. And of course, those are tailored specifically for carbon utilization technologies. So that kind of shows through in the website. In terms of target audiences, so the task team, we did a lot of thinking about this when the project began, thinking about, well, okay, who really is the audience? Who's going to be using this website? And how can we shape it around their particular needs? We were thinking, okay, well, who are the different types of people who might conduct LCA and TEA, who might use the results from these studies, or who might otherwise basically benefit from understanding the process. So we came up with technology developers, so people who are actually developing CCUS technologies, entrepreneurs who are trying to commercialize them and may find value in TA and LCA as they're developing their businesses, investors who may want to get a better understanding, a better grasp of the LCA and TA process, students who are trying to learn, so either they can interpret or conduct these assessments, policymakers, corporate managers, both people who may have a vested interest in understanding the results and being able to interpret them, funders, that's similar to investors, but kind of government funders, LCTA practitioners who may find a valuable resource. For example, I, as part of my job, conduct TEAs, and I found a lot of value just in terms of putting the site together and having these templates and so forth. It's actually really helped me in my own job, and I've shaped the site around that. So, so there's another target audience. And then really these last couple, really anyone who wants to learn more about LCA, TA, or CCUS. And we've seen that the site can be discovered via Google just with several searches of keywords, unsurprisingly. But really, we want to just put it out there as this kind of resource for learning about all of these topics. And finally, on this slide, we want to acknowledge the funding from the Department of Energy, from Amishi Kumar, who really helped facilitate this project and get it off the ground here. So here's the timeline I had mentioned before, kind of just walking through the process of how the site came together. So back in November, we came up with the draft, and we had different meetings trying to figure out, okay, what is this website? What should it be? What does it want to be? And what do we want to see on this website? Moving forward to December, that's when we identified the different audiences, the different potential audiences, what their needs are to try to shape the site. And that's when we started resource compilation too. So there's different kinds of videos and templates, databases, etc., on the website. And so we've been compiling those over the past many months. In January of this year, I started with the actual page writing. So figuring out what text should go on all of the different pages, further planning meetings, and then the beginning of the template work. And so I've already mentioned the templates a couple times, and they're the part of the website that I'm personally the most excited about. I really love the templates and how they've come together and where they're going, but that's been a multi-month process as well. Over the next couple months, it was really just further review work, further resource compilation, integration of initial feedback. So we were working within the task team and with a few people outside, just trying to get the site up to speed. And then in March, we launched a beta version, advertised it in a couple online spaces and communities and so forth, again, to try to get some initial feedback to really ensure that by today, by our sort of official launch, although I suppose our formal launch technically took place in April, but that by that time, the site was really in good shape. And so finally, over the past month, I recorded some videos for the templates, just kind of walking through how one might use them, accumulated some more templates. We uploaded the CCUS LCA TEA Glossary, which will be the subject of the other session of our webinar today, but which I'll show very quickly. And of course, the formal site launch, as I was just talking about. So as you can tell, it's been I guess a 6-month, like half-a-year effort. Here's a screenshot of the website. So I'm going to go through it in a second, but I just want to show it to give some context to the expansions I'll be talking about in a moment. Essentially, we just have a landing page. We have an about page with background information on the website. There is a page with background information on carbon capture, utilization, and storage technologies that kind of goes through each of those components and discusses them a little more. There's a whole LCA section, and then everything you see in this submenu, introduction to LCA, detailed process of how to go through one. It's based on GCI's guidelines, templates and videos tab that contains the template I mentioned, along with the video that I've recorded for that template and other videos, databases, guidance documents, and case studies, all to help with LCA. All of those sections are also repeated in the TEA section of the website. And we split it out like that so that because we figured that most people coming to this website will probably be interested in one or the other. And so then they can explore accordingly. And then finally, we have glossaries. And I won't steal the thunder of the next team presenting, but we just compiled some different glossaries with LCA, TEA, CCUS terms. And then, of course, that's where the custom glossary that our group created, that's where that glossary is featured. So just a little bit of background on the overall sitemap, the overall structure. And so I gave that because I want to talk about these potential expansions, kind of where we could go with the website. And one idea that's come up is new template classes and videos. And so I've mentioned these templates probably 5 times now. But as you'll see momentarily, the templates are based around a kind of generic chemical process. But what we're thinking is, well, CCUS is not just about the chemical industry. There's many different types of products and other processes that could be modeled. And so given that, it might make sense to have different classes of templates that can be downloaded and then modified accordingly by the users of those templates, and then kind of videos that go along with those. On the bottom left here, LCC, so life cycle costing, and LCA and TA integration. So thinking about maybe including some resources related to those topics, but also we could think about templates related to those topics. And so I just talked about different classes of templates for different technologies. But what if we had, for each of those technologies, we had an LCA model, like a base model that people modify, a TA model, a life cycle costing model, and an integrated life cycle assessment, techno-economic assessment model. So that there's a lot of possibilities with moving forward, and we're going to hopefully get some feedback today from you all that will figure out kind of what we should prioritize going forward. Template updates, as I've been using the templates for my own work, and others have been using them. Different things have been coming in, different small updates that might make them a little more user-friendly. So I've been pushing new versions of those to the website. Links to other resources. There's a possibility that in addition to what you just saw on the website, that there's other things we might want to post there that might facilitate, that might help people in the process of doing LCA and TEA for CCUS. So I've personally come across many maps of projects of the Global CO2 Initiative. We have our own, but there are others. There's one from Carbon 180. I think there's one from Third Way. I just found one from the National Energy Technology Lab yesterday. And it's like just kind of a GIS-centered project map, and there's a lot of those out there, and so it might be useful to use a website like AssessCCUS that claims to be the leading repository of LCA and TA related resources for CCUS. It might make sense for us to be a repository for those kinds of things as well. Maybe a list of organizations, although the Circular Carbon Network kind of has that down, but maybe we could link to the Circular Carbon Network and kind of just serve as a central, like I said, repository for all of these different places that might have this information. Another thing lower right here is new case study, guidance document, and database entries. So as you'll see, we have different entries for these for LCA and TEA. Based on feedback today or just other information that comes in, we may want to add new entries for these to the website over time and to really expand its value and maybe link to useful things. And then this last cloud, your ideas here. So if you have other things as we're looking at the website, other things that might be cool, that might be useful, that you personally would use and appreciate on the website, please let us know, and we'll see what we can do in terms of adding it. So now let's actually explore the website here. So hopefully this is showing. If it's not, I hope someone will tell me. So here's the full website. So I'll just kind of walk through this here. This is the landing page. So there's just some entry text here. And then we have the logos to all of the partners of the International CCU Assessment Group, which you also can see on the right side of our slides. And then these are hyperlinked to all of the respective organizations. The About page is what it sounds like. Features the Global CO2 Initiative's contact, just some other background, all of the people who worked on the site, and the logos again. The CCUS page, as I mentioned before, this page is just some background information for carbon capture, utilization, and storage technologies. So we have different sections here for each of these that just offer a little bit of very high-level background in terms of what these technologies are, what they can do, what some of the limitations are, and what some important terms are. In the utilization section, you may recognize this list of potential carbon utilization products as it comes right from the Global CO2 Initiative's website. So we copy it here. Some more information on utilization, a graphic here that also comes from the Global CO2 Initiative roadmap for carbon utilization, outlining potential potential size of carbon utilization markets for different products. Background on storage, background on why assessment is important and kind of why is the site based around TEA and LCA of these technologies and why is that so needed for accelerating the commercialization of these things. And then finally, we have a small resources list. So if anyone lands on this page and says, well, I want to learn more about CDR, carbon dioxide removal, or negative emissions technologies, or carbon utilization, or whatever it might be, we have hyperlinks that open up in new tabs for all of these different things. There's one Carbon Removal Academy, which is a relatively new resource that it's kind of structured like a MOOC or a massive online open course or so, and it walks through different resources and has different videos. So there's things like that that if people are really interested in the actual technology discussed on the site, they can use these resources here. And this is kind of a theme throughout the whole website is there's these big lists of, or like almost, I don't want to say definitive, but like big lists of resources that if one were to study all of them and read through all of them, they would have a really, really solid background and solid idea about what the topic of that section is. So moving into the LCA section, I'll just, for time's sake, I'll just go through LCA, but again, the things, the subsections and the things featured on the pages are exactly the same between the sections. So when you click on the tab, it just gives it a little bit of background and then outlines these different sections. First, we have introduction. So here, I wrote this to just be a very high-level background introduction to what life cycle assessment is, that hopefully anyone should be able to read and go through and then get kind of a high-level sense of what is LCA, what is it used for, and maybe why is it relevant for CCUS. So for example, just talk about purchasing products, and we talk about just the background of what is a life cycle for a product. So we go from raw materials extraction all the way to end of life. And then we talk about using life cycle assessment to analyze all of these steps to learn more about, well, what are the environmental impacts of this product, of creating it, of buying it, etc. And then we move into talking about the actual steps for LCA. So this graphic, it's based on the ISO LCA guidelines, but it comes directly from the Global CO2 Initiative's LCA and TEA guidelines. That just gives a framework for life cycle assessment. Then finally, we talk about different impact categories. You know, what kinds of things, what kinds of environmental impacts can LCA tell us about? And they're all listed here. And so that's just the introduction page that helps people get acquainted. And so I guess I'll go back to the target audiences I was discussing before. You know, when we're talking about, say, helping corporate managers or helping investors or entrepreneurs get up to speed with LCA, we're hoping that they'll be able to find value from this kind of page. We're hoping that those types of audiences will be able to go through here and just understand, okay, what is LCA? What is it good for? Why might I need one? Now, the detailed process page is a little different than that because this is essentially a summary of the Global CO2 Initiative's LCA guidelines for carbon utilization. So I really just went through the guidelines and just summarized them for these different sections and included graphics. And I suppose the thought process here was a little bit like helping people build up competence so that they can go through the guidelines if they want to. So, for example, someone could read through the introduction page, get a background for LCA, then they could go through this significantly longer detailed process page, kind of understand, well, what are all the individual components to LCA, and then they could dive into the guidelines document from the initiative, which is maybe 60 pages, 70 pages, something like that, and that features all of the specific guidelines for each step, and they would have enough background information, enough competence to be able to discern what are those, kind of what's going on. So we have different sections here, really, again, just outlining what's in the Global CO2 Initiative's LCA guidance document. So we have a section on goal, on setting a scope of a study. So what is it looking at? Collecting inventory data, conducting an impact assessment. And then once you have that impact assessment, how do you interpret those results? And then how do you think about reporting them as well? And I won't go through, you know, every single section because it's a lot and we're limited on time and maybe interest, but this features different graphics from the guidelines that might help understand different key components. So for example, when you think about setting a functional unit for a study and the basis of comparison, how might you think about doing that for a carbon capture and utilization product? And this graphic from the guidelines essentially shows how one might think about doing that. And so there's different things like that listed throughout. At the bottom, we have a checklist for LCA reporting, which also comes from the initiative's guidelines. So again, these are just really summarizing those pages and hopefully, and again, we have these for LCA and TEA, hopefully offering some background on these things and on these methodologies. And this might really help people because for these pages too, we're envisioning someone, going back to the target audiences, someone like an entrepreneur. Someone like an entrepreneur who is maybe learning LCA from scratch and they need to do a kind of rudimentary one just to understand, okay, is my process, does it even have a chance at being carbon neutral, carbon negative? And so they might be able to read through this page and shape their initial studies accordingly to help them figure that out. So next, Next section we have for LCA and TA, templates and videos. So you can download the templates here. It'll just download as an Excel workbook that you can work from, and I will show those once I am done showing the website. So here, this is just a video. That's my voice again, going through the whole template and how to use it. And the template is, and as you'll see in a moment, it maps onto those sections that we had just talked about. So the goal, the scope, the inventory, and so on. There's different worksheets within the template for each of those. And so one could imagine someone going through the detailed process section of the website, as well as the Glossaries Initiatives guidelines kind of section by section, and working in this worksheet, or working in the corresponding worksheet within the template to really kind of learn how to do their first LCA or TEA, or review it. You know, if you're someone who's reviewing a study, if you're trying to understand what the results are and how one might have arrived at those, and what the limitations are and so forth, you could also use the sections and kind of go through the study step by step for that. So we also here have a little paragraph under the video with a link to a different template. And so I do this for the TEA as well, but there's already existing templates out there for LCA, for CCUS, for carbon removal, those kinds of things, for TEA as well. And so I wanted to use these pages as another repository for these resources, as another place where you could find them. Maybe the templates featured on this website, which are for lower technology readiness level technologies, and they're a bit higher level, a little more like screening than maybe a full study, they would need to be expanded. If there are different things that the users of these templates need, they might find more value in these other templates. And so of course we offer our own, but we wanted to list these other ones as well. So finally, on these pages, we have a section for videos. So here, there are some other videos on how to use, say, different kinds of lifecycle assessment software like CIMA-Pro, OpenLCA, etc. Some overviews of lifecycle assessment. Maybe someone learns better by watching a video, or maybe they want their own video to show to someone or something like that. And so we have these resources here. So we have some that are from these companies that make the software. National Energy Technology Lab has incredible LCA training resources that we link to here. Global CO2 Initiative, we have videos in the past talking about these things and our guidelines and so forth. So there's links here. And then there's just other videos on that topic. So databases. This is fun, and this is where we would really appreciate feedback from everyone. If you know of a database, if you are a practitioner and you get particular kinds of data from a certain source that's not on this page, we would really like to hear about it, because we were really trying to build out this page to be more comprehensive. I mean, it's impossible, I guess, to have something that's totally comprehensive, especially with how dynamic the field is, but we'd really like to expand this page if possible. And so we have different sections here, depending on what the types of data people are looking for. Again, this is for life cycle assessment, corresponding section TEA that is admittedly a bit smaller than this, but so first, emissions and energy data. So let's say you're trying to figure out, you have solar PV energy powering your process, and you're trying to figure out, well, what are the life cycle emissions per kilowatt hour from the system, something like that. Where might I find that? So you'd go to this section. You might look in GREET, which has its own training videos, which were linked on the last tab. You might look to the National Energy Technology Laboratory, National Renewable Energy Lab, something like that. And so it should be listed in this section. We have one for specific materials, Plastics Europe, World Seal Association. We have other lists of databases, license-based ones. So EcoInvent, of course, is the largest and most transparent, but it costs money. You need to get a license for that, whereas a lot of these other resources are free or taxpayer funded. And so if there are license-based ones, they would be listed here. And then other, just kind of a catch-all section for any other databases that didn't fit into any of the other sections. So I see lots of flashing on the top of my screen, so I'm going to hope that those are different database ideas coming in. Okay, the next section, we have guidance documents. And so these feature the Global CO2 Initiative's documents for CO2 utilization that Volker mentioned and I've mentioned a couple times here. And then we just have other kind of high-level, more definitive kinds of documents that are describing what is LCA, what are the steps, what are different rules that one might have to follow if they're doing an LCA, and so forth. So we have the ISO guidelines, we have National Energy Technology Labs guidance, we have the ILCD handbook, and then we have a free textbook on LCA at the bottom. So it's a pretty comprehensive textbook that goes through all the different individual aspects of the life cycle assessment. So this is just a part of the website, maybe a little more slanted toward practitioners and people who are looking for deep and comprehensive guidance in terms of what LCA is and what a study might look like. And then finally, for LCA and TEA, we have these case studies. The case studies, it's a little slim right now, and we really focus primarily on the Global CO2 Initiative's case studies that take our guidelines and translate those guidelines into a case, into analyzing a particular technology. So we have methanol, mineralization, billion inventory, etc. There's comparable ones. I think the methanol mineralization ones, these have LCA and TEA cases within them, and then there are other ones that focus on individual parts of the assessments, and so those are featured on these pages just if someone wants to not just look at abstract guidance and actually wants to see, well, how does this work? How is this methodology applied? Arguably, this could also be done through really just looking on Google Scholar. You can just type in CCUS TEA or CCUS LCA, and something will come up that you can go through and look at. And so it is possible to do that as well. But here are just some case studies that match the Global CO2 Initiative's guidelines that may be useful for one to go through. So again, same stuff as for TEA, but I'm not going to walk through all these pages in the interest of time. And then glossaries. So as I mentioned before, and I'm not going to steal the thunder of the next team, I'm just going to show this pretty quickly. Glossaries, so we have this list. So for example, International Lifecycle Academy Glossary, and these are just hyperlinks that open in new tabs and just feature all of these different terms. So if you come across a particular term, or if someone using the website does, and they don't know what it means and they're really struggling and it's like a key concept, they can either look on the glossary on this website or maybe click through these and try to find that term. So as you can see, there's different ones for LCA, TEA, CDR, CCUS, and then here is the glossary that the International CCU Assessment Harmonization Group and the next sections team that they put together. So here, I won't go through the words, but you can search, so functional unit. So then you can see all of the different places where functional unit, for example, would be included, or you can click by the first letter of the word. Okay, so with that is AssessCCUS as it exists right now. Again, we may add those template expansions I was talking about before as new sections on the website. So you could imagine another tab popping up. We may make a specific templates section of the website or something like that. But that's the website, and we hope you all go to it and use it and bookmark it and share it with your friends and stuff. So next, I want to go through the templates pretty quickly, and then we will, and then we can get to our final Q&A and kind of collecting some feedback. So I'm going to open up the TEA template. I will again trust that if it's not showing, someone will tell me. So I'll go through this. So as you saw, there's a TEA template and an LCA template. They're very similar, and they're, in this case, modeling the same generic process. So these templates, they're not modeling a real process necessarily. It's really just a generic one. And as you'll see, there's not even specific raw materials identified. It's really kind of a blank slate that's meant to be filled in and modified by the people who download it so that they can like custom tailor it to whatever their own study or own process is. And as I mentioned, in my own work conducting TEAs, I've been using these templates, and I have personally found, and maybe I'm biased because I made it, but I've personally found that it has greatly expedited my work. It's like way better than just putting a bunch of information in a Google Doc and then going back and forth with it and trying to build an Excel sheet off of that. I find that it's really useful to have these sections laid out, and it also helps kind of keep everything consistent within a team. I've found that, you know, it can be easy that maybe there's a discussion about, well, what is the proper functional unit, and you kind of arrive at something, but not really. And then different people have different ideas about maybe what that system boundary or what the function unit should be. And so I found that having this template, having a section that like explicitly forces you to write it out is really useful in terms of just making it transparent and making it clear, like, okay, this is the sheet, this is what the functional unit is, and this is what we're going with, for example. There's of course other things where that's useful. So for a high level overview of the template, so we just have these different worksheets down here. As you can see, as I think I mentioned before, the worksheets are outlined based on the different sections of the study, based on the different parts. So for example, the TEA study outline is heavily based on the LCA one, where you start with the goal, then you just define the scope of the study, you collect a bunch of inventory data, you translate that inventory data into useful results or indicators or metrics, and then you interpret those. Well, what do they mean? Do these answer the goal of the study, what we set out to do, and so forth? So that's how it's structured by these sections. We just have this about page here. This is just a lot of background information, but one thing I will call out is this potential template expansions. So this features a lot of different individual items that a given practitioner may want to do to make this template like more useful for them, essentially. So inclusion of residence times. This template doesn't really factor that in. It just assumes a big flow process. So that's one thing. Maybe someone wants to build cash flow projections. This template right now is really just for manufacturing costs of a given product and maybe the amount of CO2 that it utilizes. But an entrepreneur in particular, if they're making a pitch for an investor, they may be interested in saying, okay, well, how does this cost of our product translate into what price we can charge or what price we need to charge to break even and what our profitability will be if costs change over time? So what I'm getting at is there's a lot of complexity that one might want to build into this sheet to make it more relevant, to kind of tailor it more specifically toward their process. And this section outlines kind of what those things are, or what those things might be. So I have a section for title and information. And then as you can see here, and also you can watch the videos on the templates and videos page too, to hear me. If you want to listen to my voice for another hour, you can watch both the LCA video and the TEA video, and I walk through every section of these templates and what goes on in them. But we have these different individual components of each of these steps. So time, horizon, scale of production. And again, the LCA template looks very similar to this. On the right here, you'll notice throughout the template, we have snapshots from the Global CO2 Initiative's guidelines that might help with certain individual steps. So for example, you might need to define, or if you're following the guidelines, you need to define the technology readiness level for the technology that you're assessing. But you might say, well, I don't remember all 9. So you know, the table is just right here for the convenience of the user that outlines all of the different levels. Scope, very similar to the goal page. There's a graphical representation of this generic chemical process that obviously needs to be modified by the person using it, different indicators. We have the inventory sheet. So this is just structured to list all of the different parameters for the different parts of the study that may be needed. In this sheet, just a quick note, there are no formulas in the formula bar. This is all just data. These are all just kind of static parameters for the study. And the purpose for this is that we're envisioning that the template may be used by a practitioner to actually conduct a TEA, conduct an LCA, but they may be sharing it with someone else, for example, a technology developer or someone who may in the future want to go in and say, oh, you know what, we've innovated now the process one, instead of using 23.4 kilograms of the raw material per kilogram of final product, it's only 10, you know? And so it would be more convenient to just change that parameter directly in the sheet and not mess up any of the formulas in the model. So there's a lot of information there. Indicators page. So the first thing here is that there is an intermediate calculation section that takes inventory data, transforms it into variables or into data that may be necessary to run the cost model. So for example, total capital cost, that's going to require a formula. So it lives in this intermediate calculation section. And then we actually have a kind of simplified cost model here. It can be expanded, and this is true for LCA as well, but in LCA, the worksheet is called impact assessment rather than indicators. It's a different name of the step, but essentially there's information necessary for both these processes in this part of the template. And I kind of just list it all in one big list, but in both cases, it can be expanded to the right to feature, say, more environmental impacts, breakdown by steps, whatever it might be. And then this translates into the summary of the indicators. And there's just one sample graphic here, just the distribution of costs at a high level for what the product is. And of course, more graphics may need to be added. And then finally, we have this interpretation. So insights on study, recommendations. We have scenario analysis, sensitivity analysis. Oh, and I should mention that scenario analysis is controlled by switches in the inventory sheet, which can be updated or changed as needed. We have some kind of basic sensitivity, uncertainty analysis. Again, this is just looking at a couple variables. A full study may want to expand these or make a tornado chart, do something along those lines. But this is just kind of a sample or an example, almost in an instructional way. Someone could go through this template and hopefully learn about LCA, learn about TEA, learn how to do them. But of course, they may want to conduct it themselves. So with that, I will pull PowerPoint back up. Go to this last slide here. So yeah, that's it. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you found it useful. I'd certainly appreciate you sharing the website with any people or any online communities or whatever whom you think could benefit from it. You know, if you were looking at it today and you're like, oh, I know the person who would really benefit from this or who could offer feedback, you know, we'd appreciate if you could share it. It's obviously all free. It's taxpayer funded. So yay. So we can all use it. And I guess now I'm happy to take questions or feedback. And so you can email me, gfaber@umich.edu if something comes up later or whatever, or you have other ideas. But I will stop sharing now and try to answer questions and take feedback. So thank you very much for listening.
Great. Thank you so much for this fast-paced walk through the new website and new resources. Certainly lots of material there. And I see from the Q&A that suggestions are coming in, specific questions are coming in. Maybe I would just leave it to you to begin to address at least some of those questions in the time that we have left before we move on to part 2.
Okay.
And perhaps if you could just read out the question and then give a response.
Yeah, that sounds good. So let's see. So Antonio says, how about social LCA? So that's a great question. There's been more activity in the social LCA front lately. I believe some of our partners from the University of Sheffield have, they wrote a paper about this that recently came out that maybe someone could paste the link to in the chat. So yeah, I'm interested in social LCA. I think part of the trouble is data. There's certain things like child labor in the supply chain or critical mineral usage or like quality of jobs, some things that maybe it's a little difficult at times to quantify. And when that's the case, and sometimes it's even harder to get data about that. Of course, because of our economic system, we have a lot of TEA data because ultimately you have to pay for utilities to pay for raw materials and that kind of stuff. LCA data, there's been a lot of work done on it, but that's of course one of the hardest parts of LCA is finding good high fidelity data. Social LCA, you know, it's a little harder. I would be interested in integrating it into the website if we had more guidance based on it, more things that came out in the future, especially specifically tailored towards CCUS, you know, because we could of course link to like the UN Environment Program's guidelines for it and other things like that. But yeah, also I haven't personally had as much experience with conducting a social LCA really at all, and so I would personally want to be a little more comfortable with that before adding, say, like a social LCA template or something like that to the website. But I'll write it down as something to keep in mind if kind of more resources come out about that. It's possible to, Antonio, again, it's possible to use a larger font. Let's see, I can look into that. Usually I think the font can be adjusted, or like you can zoom in. Maybe it's just when I was sharing, it was too small. Glad for LCI data. I will look into doing that. Okay, Anonymous. What is the guidance from Glossaries Initiative on doing it yourself versus paying someone to do it for you? For example, providing a list of LCA companies and/or LCA CPs. So I don't know if I'm totally qualified. I don't want to comment on behalf of GCI. Maybe Volker, you have an idea, but I think a lot of times it comes down to cost. You know, how much money do you have?
Well, and I think primarily also the question, what level of detail is needed. I don't know, one can think about these assessments done in tiers. The first high level, fairly simple assessments to give you guidance on whether this is something to further pursue. It also could depend on sort of who are you reporting to, who might need an independent certified assessment. As far as this website is concerned, I think it would be beyond the scope and quite frankly also the ability for us to provide links to particular companies in terms of vetting those and ignoring others. But we take the question, we will debate that. That's, I think, an interesting comment that points to a need that we haven't addressed yet as a resource to guide people there. But on individual cases, I think anybody on the harmonization team is open to have conversations to provide input on how to best proceed.
Yeah, thanks. I think it makes sense. And yeah, we can't like endorse companies or whatever it might be. But from what I've personally seen, a lot of times it comes down to cost. So if you're at an early stage startup and you don't have a lot of money, but you need to understand the techno-economics of your process, or you need to, like I mentioned during the presentation, at least get a sense of, can we be carbon neutral when we think about the whole life cycle? Then it makes sense to do it yourself. But yeah, if you're reporting, like Volker said, if you're reporting to someone and there's extremely specific requirements and it needs maybe critical review because you're using public comparative disclosure of results or something like that, then you may want to start thinking about paying an expert. And there's lots of individual consultants out there too. All right, is TCA, I'll assume that's total cost assessment, available for concrete curing process using CO2, which is one of the utilization pathways. So, you know, we've internally maybe done some of those models, but yeah, this is like I was saying before, we're looking at different classes of templates. And so, for example, the TEA one is kind of for a generic chemical process right now, but concrete curing, of course, is a very popular method of permanently utilizing CO2, or at least in relevant timescales. So, yeah, it would make sense for us to maybe have our next, if we're going to do a new class of templates, it would make sense to look at concrete curing. So Sarah asks, will any examples for real studies be provided using the generic template? Will you be housing any open data shares for public models and data sets that use your template moving forward? So if I had to predict, I think a lot of the uses of the template are going to be confidential, or like in the case of the startup, well, they're of course not going to share it. In the case of the corporation, they're probably not going to share it. If they're using it for internal decision making, if they get it reviewed, and they'll probably, to use for public comparisons, maybe they'll use the results, but not exactly the study. Yeah, and I think there's trouble here too. Like, let's say someone were to use the template and send it into us and say like, oh, you can open source this. I don't know if we would have the bandwidth or the desire to like go through that template and kind of verify that it was done properly. So, I mean, we could just put a disclaimer and say, well, these are just templates that people sent in or whatever it might be. But yeah, I think the site is more just about hosting these templates, just for anyone to download, and hopefully having different classes of them that people can modify and use however they see fit. So the tool, Antonio, the tool will be extended to scenario analysis, process scale up. So yeah, as I mentioned, there's a scenario built into the templates. There's a place for scenarios where if you change a 0 to a 1, it like propagates through the model, and it's just a switch for changing what the given scenario might be. In terms of scaling up, we also have that in both models. I think there's one of the production parameters is overall production volume, and one of the sensitivity analyses is looking at, well, how does the manufacturing cost or final emissions per kilogram of product, how do those change as a function of production volume kind of as we're scaling up? Of course, there's certain limits. In the TEA model, we're just using equipment scaling laws, like raw materials costs scale linearly, labor costs are constant, and so they can just get distributed over higher production volume, and then overhead costs are mainly dictated by capital, by like the equipment costs, which we just use scaling laws, and then the user has to manually change the number of machines. Ideally, though, if there are going to be like step changes in the process based on, you know, the given scale, you would want to build that in. I've personally found that I just do separate models for that. Like if I have one model that's modeling a chemical process at the bench scale and then another needs to be at the industrial scale, I personally find like it's too much work to like build that all into one model. So I'll just do two separate models. But if there are other ideas for how to go about that or how to integrate that into the template, I'd certainly be interested in those. So let's see, you could link to AC LCA. Thank you. In the TEA worksheet, Prashant says, in the TEA worksheet, is the sensitivity analysis calculation sheet static? Be interesting to see the break-even point, or see at what point would the process be profitable. So yeah, so how we're doing that is we're just using the data table functionality in Excel, and we're saying that for all of these different production volumes, you know, how does the manufacturing cost in terms of dollars per kilogram of final product, how does that change for all of these different potential production volumes? And that data table, I believe, should update if other things in the model are changed. And so you could also imagine maybe putting a dashed line or something in the sensitivity analysis chart saying that, okay, the conventional product is maybe $100 a kilogram, and you know, we start when we're only producing 1 kilogram a year, well, we're at $1 million a kilogram. But if we produce 10 million units or 10 million kilograms, that it's going to be lower than the conventional product or something. So it is definitely possible to look for those break-even points. Let's see here. Maybe this can be the last question here. So maybe we can take this, but I think this is maybe one for Volker. Antonio says, how can I collaborate in new versions of the guidelines and templates? So Volker, what do you think?
Antonio, just reach out to us and we'll have an offline conversation. Input is certainly welcome. Grant, thank you again for this overview and addressing questions. There's one closing one that I would like to take from Mick about any tips on comparing low TRL with high TRL systems. Well, look at a forthcoming webinar that we will be hosting, where those are exactly the focal questions of the day. So we will have we'll have multiple events over the next few weeks where we specifically deal with low TRL related questions. So thank you again for everything, Grant. And we will, in a moment, move to part 2 of the presentation today. Lorenzo Cremonese will share with you the work on a harmonized glossary. And I will hand it over to Lorenzo.
Thank you, Volker. Thank you very much, and welcome to everybody to the webinar today. The webinar is going to be on the harmonized glossary for techno-economic assessment and life cycle assessment for CCUS. So let me share my screen now. So I guess you all can see that now. So as I said, I mean, the topic of the webinar is very clear. My name is Lorenzo Cremonese. I work for the Institute for Advanced Sustainability Studies in Potsdam, Germany. And I'm also engaged in the Consistent project that is dealing with the construction of guidelines and the update of the already existing guidelines for TEA and LCA for CCU. That is funded by the Global CO2 Initiative and the IT Climate Kick. So, but today the topic that we're going to present is, as we already said, the CCUS glossary, prepared by members of the International CCU Assessment Harmonization Team that has been just shortly before my presentation introduced by Volker and by Tim. So although I'm going to be the only speaker today, at least for the first part of my presentation, I would like to mention all the co-authors of the glossary that helped me a lot in the compilation with of the glossary, and that I would really like to thank right now. And these are Michelle Muchek and Evelyn Dale from the National Energy Technology Laboratories, Katie Armstrong from the University of Sheffield, Barbara Olfek-Reutlein from the ISS Potsdam, and Volker Sick from the University of Michigan and Global CO2 Initiative. So since the beginning of the collaboration among our institutes and the formation of this international CCU assessment team, we several times our discussion raised the problem of not really having a harmonized language when dealing with CO2 utilization technologies and methods for the assessment. So although several glossaries already exist on the topic of TEA, techno-economic assessment and life cycle assessment, and also CCUS, they don't really fit our needs for several reasons. And as you can see here, this is a screenshot of the website that's been presented before me. As I said, we are, as also Grant already showed, these are listed, all the glossary that are already existing, and you can freely access online. But as I said, many of them, or all of them, had some limitations that we wanted to overcome with the preparation of a new glossary. And these are, for example, many of them are basically focusing on general LCA aspects or maybe TEA aspects. Some of them are mostly looking at carbon removal technologies or maybe carbon capture and storage. Some others, like the last one you see in the list, is basically pretty much targeting climate-related technologies. That is why the idea of producing a new glossary came about, and it reflects our knowledge, experience, and also our preference about CO2 utilization technologies. And this will also facilitate the collaboration within the harmonization group. But this is not only about creating and shaping a glossary around our needs, but the idea is also to produce a glossary that can be used as a reference document for everybody interested to use it and to engage in the same topic. So the scope for the glossary is really to produce a reference document for the entire CCUS community. Before I move forward, just let me remind you that we're going to have, after my presentation, a Q&A session, and feel free already to ask your question in the Q&A section. Please not in the chat, because the Q&A section is going to be much easier for us to answer. And I will try to answer your question together with some of my colleagues that also collaborated to the preparation of the glossary. The compilation of the glossary was not an easy task for us, and we had to spend quite some time with the individual, but also with collective work, and also a long discussion among us to reach the final agreement on many of the definitions. That is why, before starting with the core part of my presentation, I would like to very briefly tell you a story, a famous story actually, from which we found some analogies where we went through defining and also agreeing on the terms in the glossary. And this story is the story of the English Oxford Dictionary. So the English Oxford Dictionary, the story of this dictionary started back in 1857, when the Philological Association of London thought that it would have been a good idea to collect all the existing dictionary of the English language at that time and to produce a single one that would have put together all the information and harmonize, if you will, all of these different dictionaries. The beginning of the project started only 20 years later in 1879, when the Philological Association of London signed a contract with the Oxford University Press and with an expert of that time called James Murray. Initially they started to work on the glossary, and they were hoping to finish it in about 10 years. But what happened is that down the road, so 5 years down the road of this preparation, the team only arrived at defining words starting with A and T, and they produced a booklet that you can see on the left-hand side after 4 years of work. So first of all, they realized how difficult this endeavor was, and basically they were reviewing words used for at least the last 700 years in England. And they realized how difficult it was to find the meaning, or let's say to screen the meaning, how the meaning of words developed during the years, and how to define also very old words. So they had to revise the plan, and they understood that the 10 years timeline was definitely too ambitious. So to cut short the story, the final English dictionary that was called the New English Dictionary, the very last volume of it was only published in 1928. So almost 60 years after the beginning of this project. And it was composed by about 10 volumes and included about 400,000 words. And the major author, so James Murray, never really see the conclusion of this project, where he spent most of his life on, because he died about 13 years before the preparation of the very last volume of the dictionary. So it seems, therefore, that it's not really the first time that the compilation of a glossary of a dictionary, if you will, encounters more challenges. It took much more time than we originally thought or originally planned. This is basically what we also experienced with the preparation of the glossary, and that now we are very well aware of. So moving forward with the core of the presentation, why we in the harmonization group, assessment CCUS harmonization group, we decide to produce a new glossary. So some reason already told you. So limitation of existing glossaries, and also to align the language that we speak among the different groups in the international CCUS harmonization team. As Volker reintroduced, there are many other subtasks where many colleagues from the different institutions are working on, institutions that are from North America and from Europe. And so having a common language, we believe it's really important for us to harmonize and to facilitate our collaboration. Why there are these inconsistencies amongst terms and words? This basically comes, first of all, because of different technical background of the several experts composing the teams. And also it depends on which thematic fields they are engaged in or they are working on. So it's pretty understandable of these differences, but the idea of the glossary was really to share our understanding of terms and trying to come out with harmonized version of this glossary where we all agree on. Although we understand agreeing on all the terms, it's probably a very hard task and probably impossible to achieve. But we believe that at least having a common glossary where we all refer to with our different perspective, it would be a good idea, and that's why we spend much effort on achieving this. As I say, the team participating to the international group are from North America, from the US, from Canada, and also from Europe. And you may understand there are some differences due to regional perspective or regional, like just cultural differences. We tried in our work to harmonize these differences when possible, and but the idea in the longer term is to include and to harmonize also potential regional differences with other areas, so beyond North America and in Europe. So the idea is really, as I said before, to create a reference document for the entire CCUS community. When we went through the definition of the single terms, we also tried to reduce the complexity. And this is mostly because from our experience and our work in other projects, we know how difficult it is for, if you want to, from external or outsiders, to understand what these terms really means. And I'm particularly talking about policymakers and decision makers, so from the corporate and from the policy area. That's why we try to facilitate the understanding of these terms and the explanation of these terms to make them like accessible to different fields of application and different and also to different experts. And to do that, for example, we try to make the language a little bit easier and also add, for example, examples in the definitions and so on. So to use all the tricks that we can come to facilitate this understanding. As Volker already introduced before, and also Grant, the Global CO2 initiatives and also many other partners are very much into the harmonization of, or the, if you will, the integration of techno-economic assessment and life cycle assessment methodologies for CCUS, or for CO2 utilization technologies. That's why in the glossary, we also address this very clearly, and we try to create a glossary that was referring to terms from both the TA and from the LCA field, and also try to use the same language to make them compatible with each other. Sometimes in the glossary, you find some terms that we specifically say this is mostly used or only used for techno-economic assessment or rather life cycle assessment. But still, we wanted to include all of them because, again, our major scope is really to look at the environmental side and the economic sides at the same time. I saw the comments before about social LCA. This is probably something we will include in the future. We will definitely include it in the guidelines for the next version of the guidelines, and this will probably be reflected also in the glossary. Another important issue that we all know from this field is how to increase the clarity of the results that we get from techno-economic assessment, life cycle assessment studies. Results are very difficult sometimes to be communicated to experts beyond the strict practitioners. And again, I'm referring to decision makers and policy makers. So we believe that having a unified glossary might really help to try to clarify to the maximum extent what the results mean of these studies and what the interpretation also can mean. And so moving to the last point, to give you a clear example, is like to avoid inconsistent categorization of CCUS technologies when we go, for example, we go about to climate impact. So you all know technologies can be categorized as climate negative, carbon negative emissions, or carbon neutral, or greenhouse gas emission reduction technologies, and so on. So we also here, specifically for this issue, we believe that having an harmonized glossary might help to use the same language and to understand all together in the same way what exactly each single technology means in terms of its environmental impact. How did we build the glossary? So there was at the beginning a selection of experts from the CCUS field, techno-economic assessment and life cycle assessment among the harmonization team. And so we some of these experts have been selected. I'm part of this together with my colleagues that I showed you before. And we run for about 6 months, regular meetings every 2 weeks, where we discussed which terms to select to include in the glossary, how to compile the glossary, how to compile the definition of this, and also we run a continuous review of the entire work we were compiling. We used some initial sourcing at the very beginning, mainly from external certified authorities, like it can be the ISO norms or the ILCD handbook, also the glossary from the IPCC as a very initial point. After that, we try to expand it, to shape it around our specific needs, to create a glossary that best reflects the requirement of the entire group. We also had inputs from other members of the International CCUS Harmonization Team. So we run also discussion with many other members, and especially we try to address terms and needs of all the other task force that are that will be presented in the next week's their work, as already Volker showed to you earlier. So we try to address the need and to ask them to help us specifically for the terms that they are particularly interested on for the proceeding of their own project. How is the glossary looking like? Grant already showed you before how it looks, the current version online. So it's just very, as you may think, a left column with the terms and the right column with the definitions. We also have some internal references, meaning that if a term used in a definition is also included in the list, you're going to find them written in italic. That means you can possibly also having some in the future. I think it's not really working now, but having the possibility to just click on the word and going straight to the definition. We also, as I said before, we use extensive examples when relevant and when valuable. We also have external references, meaning that some of these definitions have been taken and maybe modified from the ISO norms, for example, or maybe taken as they are there, and this is explicitly written in the definition. We also included terms that we believe they shouldn't be used, so we recommend not to use, but we believe that this is important for including all the terms that you can normally find in the literature, so that any reader can just come and look at the specific terms he's interested on and maybe saw in a publication. And so looking at the way we prefer to mention this term, so it's going to find the definition, but we're also going to indicate which are the terms we would recommend to use in the specific context. And last but not least, we built the glossary with the idea to be a living document. So the document will be continuously revised and reviewed with the time, as we've seen also for the English dictionary, language changes. So it will be always possible to modify the request, and every time this will be needed. I also reported here some examples of complexity that we encountered during the glossary preparation. And an example where we had a good sense of this complexity was when we went through different terms that identify basically the concept of CO2 utilization. That is basically what you see listed here in this slide. With our investigation of the publication and let's say the online space, we realized that different definitions exist for these terms and acronyms. Sometimes they mean the same, sometimes they don't mean the same, or as Volker said before, the same definition can mean different things. And although you might think that maybe some differences are apparently small, they actually can create quite some confusion, especially for people from different fields. I mean, like beyond the TEA and LCA practitioners. These differences are particularly evident when screening publication across different fields, like, for example, examining the language in LCA studies might be different than papers on climate mitigation policies or strategies, or specifically for climate modeling, or even papers on sustainability, energy issues or systems. So our work was then to review these differences that appear in the public space, define our own definition that best reflects our needs, but still trying to remain consistent with the majority of the existing glossary and let's say the common use of this in the literature. The challenge here was also how to ensure that all the existing CO2 utilization categories are actually covered under our new categorization choice. Another example that I want to give today is of a challenging case was when we explore how the climate impact of CO2 utilization technologies are reported in the literature. In particular, we are talking here on how to use a consistent language when grouping technologies under categories such as, you know, the carbon neutral, carbon negative, or carbon reusing technologies. We know how these terms are often used improperly, or even when they are used with a correct meaning, the message is quite different when it reaches especially an audience with no sufficient technical understanding. And this is why we believe that having a glossary defining all of these at once, so in the same website, or if you will, in the same document, is very helpful for the scope of clarity. Also here, our investigation led to defining our preferences on the appropriate wording to adopt when defining the different impacts on climate of the different CO2 utilization technologies. That is anyway aligned with almost all the already existing definition that you find, again, in the open space. We also found important to differentiate and define different sorts of products and materials, as they are also used inconsistently. And also we discovered that well-defined criteria to differentiate them are really not in place. And but the choice of how to use them is rather left to the author of a publication. So for example, when we talk about raw material, different kind of raw material, to define them, or maybe even more relevant, what's the difference between a co-product and byproduct? What is exactly the right criteria? The criteria we believe is the correct one in order to differentiate them. Also was interested to discuss the difference between a byproduct and a waste product. You find this quite inconsistent among different glossaries and then also in publications. Also, we went through the definition of service and product. Service can be defined as a need that need to be met, like if you can think of transport or maybe heating. And in our glossary, we decided that the service is part of a product. So you're going to find service under the category of products. To move toward the conclusion, so we are here today for sure to show our work and our final outcome of our big endeavor. But we also I would like to ask you for your feedback. These are very welcome. You find the glossary on the website of the AssessCCU website, as Grant already showed before. And the idea is, as I already mentioned, it could be a living glossary. So it will go through still several stages of review, especially after our meeting today. We already gathered some comments and we hope to get even more with your help. It's going to go again through different round of review in the coming weeks, and even in the longer term will be revised and reviewed continuously at need. The idea was to share with you after this webinar also PDF version of the glossary, and so it's going to be a little bit easier for you maybe to comment on it and to send it back to us. How can you reach us? You can send this PDF directly to me, or you can also send it to the contacts name in the AssessCCUS website. You might also think of start a discussion on the Slack channel on the globalco2.slack.com that we use for opening the floor for any kind of comments you might have on the topic of CCU in general, and specifically also for the glossary. So again, we thanks a lot for your attention. We look forward to hearing from you. We hope you enjoyed the presentation, and please send us or email me or send us your comments on the glossary. We're really happy to include them, to discuss them further, and hopefully to create a real, very much a glossary that can be applicable, that can be also applied by most of the CCUS community. Thanks a lot. Yeah, please, Tim.
Yeah, I was say, thank you very much. The effort that your team has gone through is no simple exercise. And the example that you set from history in the beginning really resonates well, that each of us come from a different perspective or different lens when we talk about carbon utilization, whether we're coming at it from the climate change side on policy, or we're coming at it from a technology developer's view. We each tend to have our own kind of vocabulary or an understanding what we think those words mean. And in practice, what you, this group, and the broader international CCU harmonization group has really recognized is that we need to actually just improve the communication of our vocabulary in these spaces to help effectively communicate and drive action. And I think the work that your team has done as part of this harmonization group has really set a solid foundation. And it's really, I think what you indicated is it's a starting ground for this position. And we look forward to all the participants taking the opportunity to review, see where you find differences in language, as our goal is to continue to improve upon this glossary as a living document going forward through future improvements. So Lorenzo has provided a handful of options here for ways to reach out, provide your feedback, and we look forward to that interaction going forward. Lorenzo, there's one more question, and I just want to scan it real quickly to see if it's glossary related. And so the question here is it possible to apply the TRL concept for LCA evaluations? I mean, what indicators or system boundaries are suitable for low TRL? So that is a great segue, actually. We have a future webinar on evaluating low TRL evaluating technologies based off their TRL levels going forward. And I think that would be a great forum for that, to address that kind of issue. Lorenzo and Grant, I wanted to give you two each the floor for a moment for any closing remarks that you wanted to make on your sections. Lorenzo, I'll go with you first. Any concluding or closing remarks that you want to pass along to the group?
Thanks, Tim. Thanks a lot for your words. Absolutely, it's been a very enjoyable journey with my team. We also had some changing of colleagues during the time, but it was very enjoyable journey, and we also learned a lot from this work. So thanks again to all my colleagues and to the entire harmonization team. We hope to go forward to improve the glossary more and more in the coming weeks and hopefully in the coming years. So again, just want to remind once more, please send our comments, because this is really a piece of work that we want to use internally, but we want to provide to the entire CCUS community. So we are very, very happy to hear about your feedback, your input, and try to shape this glossary also around your own need, not only about ours. Thanks a lot.
Very good. Excellent, Lorenzo. And staying with today's theme of improving communication in our field, Grant, with the AssessCCUS website, which is a great addition to improving the knowledge dissemination and communication, any final takeaways or comments you'd like to leave with this group?
Yeah, sure. I mean, one thing I think about a lot is just how important LCA and TEA are. You know, a lot of us we're trying to fight climate change. You know, we're trying to mitigate this horrible threat facing our whole species and many other species for that matter. But LCA and TEA are really powerful because they help us understand, I mean, especially in the case of LCA, what are there environmental trade-offs from pursuing a certain technological path? Is this actually going to have the environmental impact we think it's going to have? And those are so important and so powerful because they allow us a level of control over our technological deployment. You know, a lot of times in the past, maybe it was kind of just haphazard, or you were just, it was almost like a greedy algorithm or something. You're just making decisions, just trying to optimize, or just trying to maximize your own cash flow or whatever it might be. But, you know, we have this great ability now to do these assessments, to study, to try to figure out, okay, well, what will the effects of this technology, or not what will they be? It's hard to have that certainty, but what could they be? So LCA and TA are really important. And so with that, it's really exciting to engage with so many different people from all around the world, like everyone in the audience today, for example, to try to both spread the word and disseminate this knowledge, but then also get feedback on how we can make it better, because we need those diverse perspectives to really figure out, well, how can we best assess these technologies? What effects do we need to take into account, and how can we best scale these things so they can have an impact? So it's very exciting.
Thank you, Grant. That's excellent. I can't stress enough the point that both you and Lorenzo made, and that is the focus of today was to introduce these concepts and to get your feedback. The goal is to be able to improve these for the community. And so your feedback, not only today, but going forward as well, is critical to this in our understanding from that going forward. So looking forward in that context to next week's activities. Next week on May 11th from 10 to noon, here in Eastern Daylight Time, we'll be presenting 3 topics from the harmonization efforts. And the first one will be around how to define the comparison product system for representativeness. Some additional guidance on at different TRL levels, how you would structure and create this comparison given the information and the type of questions you're trying to answer at those stages of development. The second one will be around baseline scenarios. And then the third one is looking at the TEA and LCA case studies of CCUS using a harmonized method. This is a new area, a new group getting started. So this is more introductory to get to understand your goals and objectives as we work towards that. Now that is only one of 2 great conversations for next week. On the following day, May 12th, from also 10 a.m., in this case till 12:30, we'll be talking about how to identify and deal with technology readiness levels. Clearly a theme we heard a little bit today from some of the comments, as well as the second part is going to be about assessing current technology learning curves and their use for emerging CCUS technologies. Once again, something we heard in one of the comments today about how do we look forward from an emerging standpoint. And so the goals of these are really to start to define how you create that comparison, what scenarios you'll be comparing it against, and then how do you handle it at different technology readiness levels, and how do you forecast forward with learning curves and understanding what things will look like. These are key things that we heard from you, the community, over the last year or so in feedback, and this group took it seriously to take a hard look at these opportunities. And so we'll be looking for your feedback as well on these critical aspects as we try to streamline and harmonize the guidance around these efforts at the international level. So I'm excited for those presentations also next week, as well as the great things that occurred today. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Volker for the final words. Thank you.
Tim, thank you so much. And a big thank you also to Grant and Lorenzo for walking us through a large body of work today. Those of you on the call who have not registered for other webinars, you can still do that either through our events page on the Global CO2 Initiative's website, or by following the dinosaur on this QR code that will take you directly to that page as well. So we hope to see all of you along with your friends and colleagues from the CCUS community in one or all of our future webinars. Thank you so much, and goodbye.